China is a democracy, according to the ruling Communist Party. But don't expect the right to vote anytime soon. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Did you know China is a democracy? It's not just a democracy, it's the best democracy. Now, if you're a regular viewer of China Uncensored, you might be thinking, wait, what? Because you know China is an authoritarian one-party state. But what you don't know is China's authoritarian one-party state has the best democracy in the world. That's according to a recent speech made by Chinese President Xi Jinping, in which he called China's political system democratic and just all around swell. Just a reminder that Xi Jinping is a man who calls himself president without having to actually be elected. If you're confused by this, that's because you're thinking of the regular kind of democracy, defined as a form of government in which people choose leaders by voting. But China's not like a regular democracy. It's a cool democracy. And in a cool democracy, you don't need to vote. No, seriously, you don't need to vote. So what's a cool democracy? I'm glad you asked. It's a whole process democracy, in line with socialist consultative democracy with Chinese characteristics. Don't know what that means? Neither does anyone else. Which is why, after Xi Jinping made that speech about whole process democracy, Chinese state-run media had to run a bunch of articles explaining it. You see, whole process democracy is a form of democracy that emerged thanks to the development of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and continues to develop along with socialism with Chinese characteristics. Are you still confused? That's because you're a Western observer who's just stereotyping democracy, man. You can't understand democracy from a new perspective. But I understand it. You see, whole process democracy is about the people. Everyone knows that any country with people in its name, like the Democratic People's Republic of Korea or the People's Republic of China, really cares about people. It's in their name. As Chinese state-run media says, the Chinese Communist Party was established with the mission to pursue happiness for the people, and over the past 100 years has stayed true to its original mission and put people high on the country's political agenda. And as proof of how much the party cares, the model of democracy China has been exercising is not only one designed to serve all people, but is also one that is present in the whole process in people's lives. Yes, in China, democracy is everywhere in people's lives. It's always watching you. See, China's democracy is not like a stupid Western-style democracy, which becomes highly representational during elections, but once the elections are over, democratic practices start declining. In comparison, whole process democracy tries to integrate democracy into the whole process of public life. Yeah, in a cool democracy, there are no meaningful elections. You don't need elections if you have democracy. Think about it. In fact, in China, there's so much democracy, there doesn't need to be any democracy. More after the break. Welcome back. Chinese democracy. It's not just a long-delayed Guns N' Roses album. The Chinese Communist Party is launching a propaganda effort to redefine democracy. A big part of that is criticizing Western liberal democracies and their direct elections. For years, the Chinese Communist Party has pretended to have elections. There's an entire Wikipedia article about China's electoral system. I mean, look, there's Chairman Mao voting. How democratic is that, am I right? China does not have direct elections for government or party officials, but China does have elections for some local village committees and some local people's congresses. How it supposedly works is that people vote for the local People's Congress. Then the members of the local People's Congress vote for regional People's Congresses. Each People's Congress votes for the next level up until the National People's Congress, or NPC. But how it actually works is the Chinese Communist Party committees at each level pick the people who are allowed to run for the Congress at each level. So if the candidates are all pre-selected, voting becomes almost meaningless. And the elections are, well, rigged. A perfect example of this is how the NPC supposedly elects China's president. But the president is actually picked by the Chinese Communist Party months ahead of time, because they pick the head of the party, who then always becomes the president. Which leads to hilarious things like this in 2013, when all but one person voted for Xi Jinping. That one dissenting voice is just to show you the election totally wasn't rigged. But since most people don't know how China's system works, you get misleading headlines about Xi Jinping being elected or re-elected president. That makes China sound like a democracy, right? Here's what happens when people try to actually run for local elections in China without the backing of the Communist Party. Back in 2011, Qiao Mu, a journalism professor at the prestigious Beijing Foreign Studies University, tried to run for his neighborhood People's Congress. Qiao was a Communist Party member, but he wasn't endorsed by the party to run. Instead, he tried to run as an independent candidate, which is allowed according to Chinese law. His proposals were strictly non-political, such as moving a smelly garbage collection site. But his department's party leader urged him to withdraw, telling him, "What you have said about democracy has made the authorities very angry." You see, the problem with Qiao is he believes in democracy and says so, out loud. You can't have someone like that run in an election. Qiao collected 50 times the number of signatures required to get on the ballot. But his university said 2 university officials had gotten even more signatures, so they would be the only names on the ballot. Then Qiao tried to start a write-in campaign, but his student volunteers started quitting. Some said that school officials had telephoned their parents, warning them that their children were engaged in illegal activities. In the final weeks before the vote, Qiao's telephone calls were monitored, and 2 security officers tailed him. Except for email, his internet tools were disabled. Again, this was all to stop a professor from running in a neighborhood People's Congress election. Sometimes I think communist China is like Kafka and Orwell had a baby. A really disturbing baby. Needless to say, Qiao Mu didn't win his election. Then in 2014, Qiao was banned from teaching at his university. And 3 years later, he left China for the US. By trying to run in an election using Chinese law, Qiao ended up exposing China's electoral system as a lie. But what's brilliant about China's new whole process democracy propaganda is that you don't even need elections. Because remember, elections aren't true democracy. This isn't the first time the Chinese Communist Party has tried changing the definition of democracy. Chairman Mao did it first. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. It may surprise you to learn that Mao Zedong was a big fan of democracy. Or rather, he was a fan of what he called the People's Democratic Dictatorship. He made a speech about this back in 1949 to defend the Communist Party. Mao said there were 2 groups of people in China, the people and the reactionaries. According to Mao, democracy is practiced within the ranks of the people, who enjoy the rights of freedom of speech, assembly, association, and so on. The right to vote belongs only to the people, not to the reactionaries. So 2 groups of people, one gets all of the rights and the other group gets none of the rights. It's just like high school. The combination of these 2 aspects, democracy for the people and dictatorship over the reactionaries, is the People's Democratic Dictatorship. Like I said, Kafka and Orwell had a baby. But while Mao was charmingly blunt about the whole dictatorship thing, over the years, the Chinese Communist Party realized that calling yourself a dictatorship leaves a bad impression for some reason. And so they came up with a solution. Stop being a dictatorship. Just kidding, they came up with a better solution. Continue being a dictatorship, but lie to the rest of the world about it by using some beautiful language. So Xi Jinping says, democracy, a shared value of humanity, is a key tenet unswervingly upheld by the Communist Party of China and the Chinese people. Hey, that sounds great. Shared values, democracy. Except when Xi Jinping says democracy, he means not democracy. But if they can get enough influential people and international organizations to go along with that lie, they've succeeded. Because who's to say whether a country is democratic or not? Obviously its own people, and by people she means the party. The ruling Communist Party gets to say whether China is a democracy. Actually, the party will have really succeeded when they can convince people that China's whole process democracy is better than Western democracy, which is the argument they're currently trying to make. Some people are going to believe the party, and not just the type of people who think North Korea or Cuba are better than the US despite never having been to North Korea or Cuba. I'm talking about people like Michael Bloomberg, who said while running for president that Xi Jinping is not a dictator because he has a constituency he has to listen to. That's not too far off from arguing China is a democracy, just a different kind of democracy than America. I expect to hear some Wall Street CEO say that any day now. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding websites Patreon and Locals. Gwerkin Fenical asks on Patreon, I was wondering if you, or probably more so Shelley, since all Asians are apparently owned by China per the CCP, if you guys were worried about reprisals while in the US. Also, in a recent video, you said the members of the CCP probably don't watch your channel, but I think you're forgetting you are legit now. China Daily ran an article about you. Add oil. First of all, I just want to make it clear that I am just as worthy of being targeted by the Chinese Communist Party as Shelley. There's no good reason for them to attack her instead of me. You're right that people have been harassed by the Chinese regime even in the US. We've talked to many activists who have been threatened in the US, Australia, and other countries. Often the Chinese regime threatens their family members who are inside China, which is a real low blow. So yes, I take precautions, like living in a bunker, 28 floors beneath the Empire State Building. The Communist Party will never find me there. Also, thank you for mentioning the China Daily article. They called us a leading Western media outlet and disgraceful anti-China garbage. We're very proud. However, that article was written by an Italian-American freelance writer, so it's not quite the same as being attacked in my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times. Someday. Thanks for your question, Gwerkan, and thanks for the oil. And thank you to everyone else who supports China Uncensored. You can either do it on the community subscription platform Locals or the crowdfunding platform Patreon. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.